my name is Rita Duncan. Essentially what I'm going to talk about today is Native Americans throughout the United States. But you're going to find out that I'm also going to delve into the lower Americas as well, because in consideration for the fact that many of the Native Americans actually came from that area that were in the United States. I recognize a few faces here, some I hadn't seen for a while, but it's very nice for all of you to come. The first actual people we're going to talk about would be essentially from South America. Now, if you'll find, most of the mound builders that were in this entire region here and throughout the United States came here essentially one way. One of the main transportation tributaries that we still have today, that was the Mississippi River. And from there they went and just spread themselves all along that Mississippi Valley, all the way from the south coast all the way to the north coast. But you'll see them at different time periods, but in doing that you're going to see their artwork, and that's what you have to go by. When you go to archaeology, you're finding the different types of artwork, the different types of housing that they had, the different type of clothing they had, if they had a written language, if they used any kind of numeral systems, and you're finding that over and over again. It was the same in South America as it was here. When you begin in South America, you begin with the Olmecs. The Olmecs were, of course, an African indigenous people that came across the ocean. Most people do not realize that fact, but no, they were not what we would consider Native Americans, but they were. They were native to this area. They had run from their country for some reason or another, and they ended up on the coast of South America. And from them you're seeing several other groups coming into South America and then spreading throughout that area, and then you're also finding them come up in here for different reasons. Either they were warring over territory because there were wars, because other people were coming in and settling in those areas. So we're finding them coming into this area anywhere from 5,000 to 2,000 years ago. So they really established themselves quite well at the beginning. The first were the Edinas. Have anybody heard of the Edinas? Okay, she's never heard of them.
Are they mound builders? Mound builders?
Yes, they were of the mound builder sect. There were essentially 3 mound builder sects, the Edina being the first one. They established themselves, and they also brought the artwork right along with them. Now, you wouldn't think at that time period you would find this kind of thing, but essentially what they did, as soon as they came into an area, they developed their lifestyles through the habitat they were living in. When they were in South America, they had a lot of different artifacts that they could use there to construct the buildings they lived in, the clothes that they had, the type of food that they had. So when they came up the Mississippi River and began to spread out, it wasn't nearly, I would say, there it was more like a jungle atmosphere, a lot more humid all the time. If you stood still, you would be immediately covered by growth. Here, it was not that bad. Here, they could actually spread themselves out a little bit better. But still, they had to develop according to the habitat that they were living in. Here, especially in this area, was essentially all swamps. Well, there were no rocks. There were no essentially materials where they could build bricks or anything else to build pyramids. And the biggest reason, why are they building pyramids in the first place? Why are they building mounds? You're finding them in South America doing that. Well, essentially they came from Africa, the first ones that came. Most people do not realize or adapt this to this culture here of being African. Pyramids? No, that would be Egyptian. No, yes, they did have pyramids. In fact, the Africans had more pyramids than the Egyptians did. They were the first ones to develop it. And then those people were used by the Egyptians to actually help build the pyramids. So these were the builders. They weren't necessarily the people who developed them or could actually build them, but they developed it to a certain degree. Along with their culture, when they came here, then they began using those same materials they found in South America. Up here they didn't have those materials, so they used dirt. Essentially here they were used to bury their dead. They were also used, we're finding them all the way from northern Michigan all the way down to the south coast of the United States, where they were just mounds, but they were actually signal mounds. They were smaller, but a fire could be set upon them, and essentially you could have a signal spread 700 to 1,000 miles quite quickly within 24 hours if they were being encroached by anybody. So the first ones would be, of course, the Edina. Most people are not familiar with them because those were the first ones to come here. It was a smaller sect of people. They were just developing at that time. They did bring artifacts with them, but to see the artwork they had is amazing. You'll see here the shapes of the bowls, pottery they had. This is essentially because they would be put into hot coals. They were cooking pots. So they could cook their soup. I've actually seen pots large enough like this for me to stand inside of. So essentially when they had their dinner or food, it was set into the main portion of the village. Huge fire would sit there, coals, burned down to coals, and then the pots put there, and everybody would put something in there, just like making rock soup. Everybody was bringing something. They were bringing meat, they were bringing spices, and everyone would eat from that particular bowl. Okay? So when we see this, this was essentially just an ornamental type of thing. I'm still trying to figure out how they would possibly wash it. It would be very hard to do. So it was ornamental. They used to put essentially ferment things, such as alcohol. It's a great part of life. And at that time period, there was no refrigeration, so things would ferment quite easily, quite quickly. So quite often they would drink a fermented drink, and they would want the tops of them to be small to where they could actually cover them so insects and different things would not get inside of them. Here, like I said, these are for cooking. These would actually be for carrying water from different streams. So as they come up the Mississippi, they spread out over smaller tributaries like going into the Kankakee or the Yellow River. And that way, they would be out of floodplains. You couldn't get right along the sides of these streams or these rivers because of the flooding. And then they had to adapt their lifestyles, their housing. The next sect to have come in were these. And here we're seeing an unbelievable trade system. We're still seeing the same people, and we're seeing actual pictures of them in their artwork. This is mica that they've actually carved out. About the only place you can get this is in West Virginia. So these were actually done in Indiana. So they have a tremendous trade system as well. Anytime they wanted anything from any coast, the east, the west, south, all the way up to the north, it was quite easily attainable. And their carvings, I'm sure they had great metallurgy and things like that to carve with. No, they actually didn't. So to see this type of artwork is just tremendous. They did do some metallurgy. You're seeing this. This is copper. Has anybody seen any of these parrots around here? Where do you think you might see them?
That a pretty chicken?
No, try South America. So they were still bringing artifacts with them. They didn't come up here empty-handed. So you're still seeing home up here in their artistry. This here's just absolutely beautiful piece of pottery that they did. Here are their burials. So it shows they did have some type of religion as well, didn't they? The mounds themselves were burial mounds. They used these to bury. They buried in layers, family members. Quite often, especially with the Edina, they lived in very much the same type of habitat that people that lived in here, say 200 years ago, and that was a dome-shaped hut made of cattail reeds. Except that the poles, instead of going across like this, they actually had them going out like this to make them stronger. But if a member of their family died, they would bury them right inside of there. And then they would build themselves a new hut. But that was during the wintertime when they could not bury them. They could not dig the dirt up. So essentially that would be the burial spot. When spring came, they would enclose the entire thing and put all the artifacts of that person inside of it. One mound area, they happened to find this 16-pound hammerstone. They said, well, what on earth would they have used that for? Well, essentially there was someone there who used that just like a sledgehammer to pound these poles into the ground to hold them. And that's how they would fasten the saplings to them. They would tie them to those poles. So that 16-pound hammer belonged to a really big guy that pounded those poles into the ground. And that was found actually in Union Mills. Anybody familiar where that little town is? Union Mills is nothing but a burial ground for the Hopewell and Edina Indians. Just within the town itself, there are over 32 mounds. Surrounding the area, over 80 mounds. So the entire town was of Edina and Hopewell culture. Within Indiana, just northern Indiana, say from Lafayette up to the Michigan, Lake Michigan border, there are over 200 mounds just in these little areas here. But most have been just forsaken by archaeologists saying, well, they're really of no historical value because they're not finding enough artifacts. Well, if something is over 2,000 years old, it's really hard to find an artifact, considering it's probably gone back to what was considered the Mother Earth. Here is actually a town that they would live in. Now this is coming up into the Hopewell. You can see that they're really developing their culture now. There's more people being born, so they need a tremendous more amount of room. So you're finding these people in Ohio and Indiana, Wisconsin, and you're also seeing them make effigy mounds as a part of their religious culture. And you're still seeing same type of artifacts showing what these people actually look like, to sort of say, well, we don't know what they look like because we didn't have a camera to take a picture. We do. Right there's the camera, right there's the picture of what they look like. They actually left a picture for us, so we knew what they looked like. You can see how big these squares are, so it took up an enormous amount of area. So that meant they needed a lot of wood, they needed a lot of food for the habitat they were living in. And you're finding more mounds, especially in Ohio and Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin. And you're going to find out when they move to the next cultural stage, which would have been the Mississippian Indians, you're finding almost all of these that are in these areas I just mentioned disappearing. Now the main reason they're disappearing from here is because now we're starting to get other cultures moving into this area. And these cultures are not only coming from Canada, but they're also coming from European countries as well. And the diseases that they brought here have almost wiped out almost this entire culture, as well as the Edina culture, which were the same two cultures. The Mississippian culture is developing from that, and you're not finding them, but just a very few on this side of the Mississippi River. You're finding them on the other side of the Mississippi River. The culture is beginning to change. They're not doing as much artistry, but they're still doing artistry, but it's more about survival. And now they're having to fight for territory, which they did not have to do that much before. You're also finding their mounds are smaller, closer to the rivers, so there's escape routes. The food chain has changed a bit. The artifacts, especially the artistry, is beginning to change. As far as I know, that there's very few records or written records that even describe the Mississippians, but I did find one record which was actually written by a man named Rene Cavalli-LaSalle. Do you know who he is? He actually came through this area, came through the Kankakee River systems.
LaSalle, is that his name?
Yes, LaSalle. Yes. I just say it a little different, okay? But he actually came through our river systems, trying to find the Mississippi River, and he wrote in his diaries of having seen these people, which looked quite odd to him. He saw mounds with scaffolding on top, and the people dressed in odd character in comparison to the Indians that he was used to. He actually spoke several Algonquin, one Algonquin language and several dialects of that language, but could not speak to these people. And the interpreter they had with him was a Mohican, and he could not speak to them as well. So there was no more than a paragraph indication that these people still existed at the time period he was here. But what he was bringing settlers here. And the first settlement that he started was on the lower Mississippi in the lower part of Illinois. And then there is a notation in Detonio, a soldier that worked with LaSalle, stating that they were attacked while LaSalle was away back in Montreal trying to settle his estate problems. They were attacked, viciously attacked, almost all the settlers killed. He had to move them to Starved Rock. took and built a fort on top of that, and that's where they survived. But almost all the settlers were gone, killed, or escaped. At that time, he said that they were Iroquois. He did not know who they were because he couldn't speak their language. He just knew that they were very fierce fighters. So I would not doubt that it was not this Mississippian culture that did attack them when they were trying to make a settlement there. So that is mainly what happened to most of these people, is disease. Some battles, but then where did the woodland people come from here if they weren't part of the mound builders? Can anybody here name me 5 tribes that lived within the Great Lakes of the woodland period?
Miami, Potawatomi, Sioux.
5? I want one person to name 5.
Winnebago.
You're a Winnebago. No one can name that. You're a historical society, okay. That's all right. You're not forgiven, but okay. There has not been one teacher or one professor or any other historical society could actually do that, which is a real shame. There are over 35 different tribes that live within the Great Lakes, and we should know them. They lived here just before our forefathers lived here. But yet we don't know them by name, and it's a real shame. They were not just one tribe, or just all called Indians. They actually had names. They were Potawatomis, they were Ottawas, they were Chippewas, they were Iroquois, they were Mohicans, they were Delawares. Even in our own state of Indiana, we don't even know the names of the Indians that lived here other than to call them Indians. Now, are they from India or are they from Indiana? I'm not really sure. So that's our biggest problem. We don't know the history of these people that we essentially ran out of this area so that our forefathers could live here. And you'll see on these papers here that I brought, this is not just papers. These are their actual names. That's who these people actually were. The Trail of Death occurred right here in Indiana. Anybody know about the Trail of Death that occurred here? And what group of Indians it was with?
Potawatomi.
Yes, very good. We have one. No, it was the Potawatomi. Can you tell me what their actual tribal name is? No. Okay, they're called the Anishinaabe.
How do you spell that?
That's for you to find out. That was their actual tribal name. You'll find out that almost every tribe that lived within the Great Lakes, we are calling them one name, and that was not their actual name. This was usually a name that was given to them by explorers and misinterpreted by interpreters for these explorers who had no idea what their language actually was. So each one of them had a different name than what we actually know them by. The Potawatomi were the Anishinaabe. Here are their birth records, their marriage records, and their death records. Now, how could they possibly have that? For over 200 years before our forefathers came to this state of Indiana, these people were Catholics. They actually walked one winter to Detroit, prostrated themselves before the bishop and asked for the priest to be sent to them. Not only did the bishop send one, but he sent his brother, who was quite surprised by the fact that these people's children could recite the catechisms perfectly. Now, how could they do that if they hadn't seen a priest in 60 years? These children weren't even born then, but had been handed down from father to son. In the same way with the mothers to the daughters. It had been. These records are all from Notre Dame University. Notre Dame University would not exist except for the fact of the Potawatomi that lived in this region. But in thanking them for their religious starts and building the first churches and chapels in this region, we gathered 859 of them and took them on the Trail of Death, taking them in the middle of a drought year. You'll also find from these records most of the village sizes were the largest about 35. Most of them were family sites, anywhere from 3 to 10 people. We gathered in the middle of the night using guns and bayonets, and then burning their homes afterwards. And then we marched them out of here in single file, which you'll see from this here. These are pretty wild Indians, so you got to be everybody okay? These are actual pictures of them. Look pretty wild. Now this is the same time period that they were gathered and taken out of here. You're not seeing feathers in their hair, you're not seeing them yelping or doing anything really bad. Most were Catholics, most had begun to adopt European lifestyles as well as clothing, as you can see here, and had been doing that for about 100 years. Because not only did they speak Algonquin and several dialects of it, they also spoke French because of the French fur traders that came in. What I told you before is these people had actually come from Canada. You're going to find that the Woodland people now were not part of the mound builders. They actually came down, they were part of the neutrals that were in Canada, came down, migrated from there down into this area. Now we may say that the Inuits or the Eskimos came this way. I don't know if these people were a part of that group and then had developed new habitats from moving from one area to another, but eventually all of these people had come from the upper Great Lakes down to the lower Great Lakes. And you're seeing the lifestyles that they're adopting. You're seeing here they're actually using canvas. They were using canvas in the latter 1500s already in the Great Lakes regions. Here you're seeing how they're marching on the Trail of Death, one at a time. Here the Archbishop is here and he is praying with these Indians before they're taken from this region. If you read in any history book, you'll see that 39 died along the way. In all actuality, if you actually read my records here, which actually are the records from the priest where they were moved to, you'll find that within 2 years, 300 died. Mainly because when they were moved there, the government did not provide food, they did not provide housing, they didn't even provide a cemetery for the dead. So when these people were moved here, and here are the names of all of them. And the reason we can do that is because I'm a historical genealogical researcher, and this is the actual names from the priests, from the schools they went to, so that you can see also government roles as well, which the government took census records of them. So all those are here. All their names are down here in red.
Christian names?
Most have Christian names, yes, using their Native American name as their last name. But you'll find out their name was Timothy and Leopold and Simon and Thomas. Anybody ever, I know those are wild Indian names. Anybody ever hear that kind of names? Yeah, maybe we adapted those into our habitats and used their names. No, they actually adapted quite a bit. Here, this record, as I said, is from Notre Dame University. I don't see any officials. They threw me out of there the last time. This shows where they're being baptized, where they're being married, where they're dying. And this is before they're taken out of this region. The only thing I could never figure out is where did the priests get all their paper? Because they had a tremendous amount of paper here. This is a big bundle of paper for them to write all these records.
Are those the originals?
These are copies of the originals,
Copies of the
yes.
originals.
That's why I said Notre Dame will come after me. But the Woodland people here quickly had to adapt to whatever they came into, the same as the mound builders did. In doing that, you're seeing they also adapted to people who were coming in here and trading with them. But what was important, not only did the traders give them a tremendous amount of, wealth to their culture, but they also gave it back to them. They would not have been able to stay here whatsoever. They were in forts. They were soldiers. Before they were homesteaders that came here. They could not exist in those forts because they had no idea about the habitat. They had no idea how to live, especially in the winter, because they were tremendously hard. They weren't like they were in Europe. It was the Indian that they depended upon totally for every ounce of food that they ate. If it had not been for the Indian, they would not have been able to survive here. As early as 1806, I'm finding over 2 tons of wheat being grown in Grand River area, Michigan, and being sent to Mackinac, Fort Mackinac for bread for the winter. And that bread was not being cooked by anybody in the fort, but it was actually being cooked by Indians as well. And then being taken to the fort. So that not only did they trade furs, they traded every type of food that you could possibly imagine. Dried food, dried fish, dried, essentially there were no buffalo in this area on this side of the Mississippi River, so there were a lot of deer, there were a lot of elk. Turkeys were further down south from here, a lot of prairie grouse, rather, not they weren't grouse, grouse, But anything that they ate, they had to depend on. But the most favorite thing was, of course, this little thing here, and I left it in this shape. I don't know if anybody knows what this is.
It looks like maple sugar.
It is actually sugar. There was no sugar here. We can't survive without sugar. But what they did is they tapped these trees. And these little vessels I showed you on the side were perfect for making a little bit of liquor from that. Yeah. Actually, maple syrup was a sap taken from the trees. Then they would cook it down into the sugar because it couldn't be transported. A family would take approximately 1,600 pounds of sugar out of a bush every year. Now that's each family, and the bushes were actually inherited from the mothers and daughters. So it was kept for generations and kept up. They would take the sugar out in pound containers called mokaks, and then that would be traded to the forts, and it was quite valuable to them because they just didn't have any other form of sweetness. Unless they wanted to climb up into a tree where there were wild bees and get the heck stung out of you. And so that wasn't a real pleasant thought most of the time. So they depended a lot on the sugar. And if you tried to take it out 1,600, it wouldn't have been 1,600 pounds. It'd be 3,200 pounds of liquid to carry out of there. Well, within 2 weeks when the weather warmed up, everybody'd be getting a little whoopsie there because it would all ferment. It has to be kept cool, and there was no way for them to keep it cool. So they made it into sugar, very much like making fudge, paddling it down. And then they used a freeze method. There was never a hot rock method used for sugaring. I actually asked somebody one time, where are you getting those rocks that you're using to boil with? Oh, we got them from the steel mill over here. They're iron ingots. Okay. I'm not really sure the Indians had those, but I don't know if you've ever put a rock into a cold liquid, but it immediately becomes shards. It was not a drinkable or a feasible edible product. They did not use rocks. It was only written one time in the Jesuits' relations records that occurred, and it was because a man named Robinson and a priest were looking at them making maple sugar from some distance, and they saw them putting something round into the liquid. Actually, they were cooking potatoes for supper that day. So that was another product that even Europeans had to get used to. They hated the taste of it. I've read in many different diaries of the priests and soldiers at the forts how awful these things were. And I'm sure most of us depend on those awful looking things today. And love the taste of them, especially with sour cream and cheese. Bacon bits. But of course, this is what they had to do. Develop different foods for the habitat as well as different styles of habitat. The woodland people that lived here, especially in this region here, lived mostly in, what do they call them? Wigwams, yes. And what are they made out of?
Cattails.
You're not the answer. I know who you are. If you want to help on later on, you better be nice.
I think he's the teacher's pet.
Yes, he's the teacher's pet. But they were made of cattails, and that was mainly because this entire area was nothing but swamp. And what was the fur traders trading for here? What was the big animal? That's one wrong answer. Got another one?
Raccoon?
Yes.
Oh.
A chat. Yes.
What was it?
A chat.
Cat.
En français.
Yes, cat.
A raccoon.
That's right. A chat. I said what you said, I said in French. Okay? That's all right. No. Raccoons were very big on the list. There were very few beavers. I said this was a swamp area. It was swamp, it was stinky, it was nasty. Chicago was stinky onion. It was not really a movable swamp, except in the spring when the rains came. Then you saw the Kankakee and Tippecanoe and the Yellow River and the Wabash flowing over into the swamp areas. No, the biggest thing was rats, and that is French for muskrats. A man could get 2.5 point blanket for 30 rats. There were very, very few beavers because this was not a good habitat for them. So rats was our biggest thing, muskrats. And it was considered a prize animal, easier to catch than a beaver. But no, this is what almost every fur trading record indicates, they were muskrats. Sorry about that, I know you like beavers.
Yeah.
Are there any questions about anything about the Native Americans that lived here?
And how did they interact with the Hokia?
You're talking about Western Drive?
No, down at the foot of the
Oh,
Mississippi and the Ohio.
Okay.
The Cahokia mounds.
okay, in Illinois.
Yes.
All right, essentially those were mound builders.
Pardon me?
They were mound builders. They were the Mississippian mound builders.
Okay.
When they did an archaeological dig there, what they did, they found that the same type of artifacts that I'm showing right here, showing that they were a sect of that first three that came, the Edina, Hopewell, and Mississippian. Those were Mississippian mound builders. It was one of the few that I was talking about that actually came across the Mississippi River and lived on this side. It was a very large settlement. When they did the archaeological dig, they actually threw the bodies right up on top of the earth and allowed people to come in and take looks at them until there was a protest brought about for reburial of these people. But they were the last of the culture, and I believe that that would have been one of the sects of people that LaSalle did talk about in his diary as actually still being here at the time period he was here.
So was there much interaction between the Potawatomi and the Woodland
None
area
whatsoever.
down that far
No.
too?
If anyone had interacted with him at all, it would have been the Shawnee. In that region there, the Potawatomi was never down that far. About as far down as the Potawatomi and Miami were Lafayette.
Oh, Lafayette, okay.
Mhm. And you also had the Delaware down in that region as well. But yes,
Two questions. One was, when you were talking about them burying inside the hut and then making that into the mound, they would have had fire within the hut, so the ground would have been warm enough to actually dig and bury someone in there if they died during
no, they were
the
laid right on top of the ground. And then they were ornamentally decorated, and then they were covered with hides and artifacts put them around them. And the hut was left until the spring thaw, and then you'll see, especially around little creeks and things where the dirt has been dug out around them, they took that dirt because it thawed first and used that to put on top of this person to bury him in an actual mound. So that hut actually became a mound.
So if a family member died in your hut, you would have moved out and
Right.
the hut to the person, right?
And usually there may be 4 or 5 bodies in there by spring,
Okay.
because the winters were quite hard here and they were not used to them when they first came here. And that was the Edina culture that did do that. Not the Hopewell or the Mississippian, but the Edina, the first ones who came here.
Okay. And then the other was the death march. What years was that?
That was in, actual march was in September of 1838,
Okay.
so it was quite late. And the main reasons that they did take them out for the Trail of Death was 3 main reasons. One, they were Catholics. The settlers coming here did not like Catholics. Second reason was they wanted their land. Third reason that they were Indians. Those were the only reasons they took them out. These people were very, very peaceful, were not warring people, so they were removed for no other reason than that. And they were taken from a very large range all over northern Indiana, a few from southern Michigan. In southern Michigan, they'd already established a chapel there for the priest, as I said, was sent down the brother. Later on, he was taken out because before he went to seminary, he actually studied law in Europe. So he was actually writing letters to the government causing a big problem. So he was asked to be removed. And then at that time, they sent a younger priest in here by the name of Benjamin Marie Petit. He had also studied law. So he was also causing a little bit of a stink as well. But he stayed with them until the death march actually occurred. He was not given permission to go with them. But what the people there in southern Michigan did is they gave, in treaties, approximately 360 acres for the University of Notre Dame. It was not at that time a university. It was to be set up as an orphanage and as a school for Native Americans. The main reason they needed an orphanage is the fact that approximately 5 years earlier, about 10,000 Native Americans, as they normally did about every other year, went to Mackinac Island to be baptized, to be married, and then come back to this area. They did not return for 2 years, losing over 3/4 of their people to the chicken pox. So they came back, only about 2,000 came back of the 10,000. They lost a considerable amount of people. Most of them were children that did come back. So they'd asked for an orphanage to be set up as well as a school to educate these children. Essentially, when they took them out in 1838, things changed. The priest did communicate with the archdiocese, which was in Bardstown, Kentucky at that time. Got permission to go with them, but not until they were at Logansport, and that's where these pictures here on the other side were. It was at Logansport where their archbishop met them for their final goodbye to Indiana. And the chief there said, "I don't want land out west. Please give me $2,000 in gold." They laughed at him and thought he was a fool. So they gave him the $2,000 in gold, figured they would starve to death, wouldn't have to worry about them anymore. The people in Michigan were a little bit more attuned to Catholics, had several Catholic churches there already. In the middle of the night, he gathered everyone in his tribe. They escaped across the border into Michigan. He bought 800 acres of land, then went to the tax man the next day, paid taxes, and he says, "Now I'm a settler and you can't kick me out." That man's name was Leopold Pokagon, Four Winds Casino. That is the only reason they still exist here today. Here I have a treaty that gives the name of every one of those Potawatomis. This was a treaty that was actually for the land sale of Chicago. There's a copy of that treaty, and it was done in 1832. This treaty is in 1866. The government forgot to pay for the land. You know how we are. But in negotiating with the government, they were able to get payment for it. Each and every one of the tribal members received $169.50. You'll notice the first signature up here is Simon Pokagon. He signed with an X, as well as all of the rest of his people did. Here's his little X. X mark. Every one of these people signed with X's and received their $169.50. If you see more money there, that means according to how many members are in their family. No matter the age of the family member, they received $169.50. No interest, of course. Simon Pokagon had 2 college degrees and was forced by the government to sign with an X, as well as many of the people on this treaty. All had very good educations at that time period. But the government did not want the public to realize that they were educated people. One of his degrees was from Notre Dame University.
So did the rest of the tribe went to Kansas aside from
Osage,
these?
Kansas, yes. There they had a small mission, and the first thing they essentially had to do was set up a cemetery because so many were dying. But the government treated them rather badly once they did get them there, not providing anything for them. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, how many migrations was there to America from Native America? I mean,
Well,
they don't
I
know the
essentially
language,
have
right?
absolutely no idea, but I would say that there were probably anywhere from 20 to 40 migrations from different countries to the United States. Saying there was only one is ludicrous at this time period with the archaeological evidence that we have. Yes, of course, the Inuits came here, but then we're also seeing several other different nations coming to the shores of the Americas. And the same with South America, and using the river tributaries to actually come up into the United States. And when the Europeans came here, they did the same thing, migrating into different areas using those same river tributaries to go throughout the United States to live today as we are. That's why we're such a diverse nation today. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
When you mentioned the burials, what's the connection with burials that are documented in a seated position? What's the significance of that?
Usually those in a seated position were woodland. Such burials were due to the fact that they have, as far as religious consideration, is they did not believe in digging into the Mother Earth, and this was why. They would set them up near a tree, or they would, as here you are seeing, this is actually a woodland burial. They are making wood pylons. The body is put into it, and dirt covered over top of them, as well as logs put over top of them to keep wild animals out. And this was a Potawatomi burial on the Trail of Death that occurred. They did not want to dig into the Mother Earth. That's why most of them were that way.
I noticed most of the Indian mounds are along small creeks and stuff, like in Union Mills there.
Yes,
So they just dug that dirt out of
Yes.
the creek down bed.
because it was the softest, essentially, material to dig. They didn't have metal shovels. They did do metallurgy, but this was mostly copper, but not essentially for a large tool, but for smaller tools. Yes.
I was going to ask how they, if they didn't dig into the earth, how they built the
It
mound.
was actually scooped from along small creeks. So they didn't consider that digging because they were actually scooping it with baskets and then carrying it, literally hundreds of loads of it. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
How many years after when the Indians were out in Kansas did the Catholic, when did the priests show up? Did they follow right quick? Or
Essentially, when they went to Logansport, one priest was assigned to go with them. That was Benjamin Reed Petit. He went with them the whole way. He had gotten permission then. And then also the forces that had taken them there came back home, and a new militia was assigned to take them, which consisted of about 25 wagons and over 250 horses, which were used mostly by the soldiers. The priests went with them, and then when they got to Osage, Kansas, there was already a mission site there, which was essentially no more than a double log cabin. These weren't huge sites. They were pretty much isolated, especially on that side of the Mississippi River at that time period, which was 1838. The priest that left them there, he was not allowed to stay. He started back. He got as far as St. Louis. There he died of a quite horrendous death. The description I will not say because it was that bad. The man was 28 years old. Yes. So you can imagine how bad it was for the Indians. Excuse me, we're stealing a drink of water here. Will there be any other questions? Yes, sir.
What time, oh, okay, go ahead.
Go ahead, John.
I was just, you brought a lot of stuff. I was wondering if you could describe some of the things
Okay.
that you have.
Can I have your question, then I'll...
Oh, what time frame would that have been? You said they left here in 1838.
They left in 1838. It took about 66 days for the travel
Okay.
time.
Then there was a fort up on Lake Michigan and Indiana Dunes that was named
Fort Petit.
Fort Petit. Was that after this
That's-
priest?
No, that was before then.
Oh, that was before that?
Yeah, that was before that time period,
Okay.
yes.
So there's no connection?
No,
Between
there's
that fort
absolutely no
and this
connection
priest.
whatsoever. This fort was, you got a bathroom here, about the size of a bathroom. That's no joke.
That's what Petit means, that's small.
Yes, very small. It was actually occupied by the French, as well as the English and the Spanish for about 3 hours when they tried to take it over. I don't believe there were any more than 5 soldiers at any one time. Most of the time, 3 soldiers that were actually taking care of that fort.
I got an important question.
Do you now?
Yeah, but you said all the farmers wanted them to go out there and get their land and this and that, but wasn't the President of the United States' idea to send them out there?
Oh, he had a great deal of, no, he loved the Indians, he said.
I mean, he's the one that had to write the order, wasn't he?
Yes, he actually had to write the order for them to be sent. No, it was the settlers who said that they had attacked them in the middle of the night, pounded down their doors and tried to kill them, which was completely and totally false.
Who was the president?
The $20 bill man.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
Some of the things here, this actually shows you why I'm a historical genealogical researcher. You actually have to, with any group of people, follow their lifestyles, where they have moved to, what kind of foods they eat. Then we need some kind of information on that. Everybody wants absolute documentation. Here you're going to see documentation. This is not just coming out of some book that was written. This information has never been even put into a book. Notre Dame knew I had this, they'd be in here tonight. And y'all would be in trouble. I'd say it was your fault. For you to get even one page of this out of Notre Dame, there's baptismal records, marriage record, death record, they would allow you one page, maybe in a 5-hour period, to look at it. How I obtained this, I'm not telling you.
Why are they guarding it so closely?
I have no idea, due to the fact that the Indians of this region gave them that particular ground. Then they went to the government and actually paid for it because they couldn't get it negotiated with the government. But these are their records. It's not something that they're going to do and come back on and say, I want that university. They don't want that. They want their records to show their genealogy. So essentially that's all they're looking for, is a genealogical record. They're not wanting to get anything back from it. But these are actually rolls, census rolls, birth records. A lot of it is government documentation. We have the trail of death that occurred here. We have treaties here. The treaties are actually giving us names of people. These are actual names. They're actual names that were written at that particular time period. Say one little thing, one little research project I had. It was actually over a head. I mean a real head. Chief Anishinaabe came from just below the Twin Lakes region over in Plymouth. He was killed actually by one of his sons, his oldest son, because the father was a drunk and had beaten his mother quite severely, so he killed him. In doing so, he was buried, Chief Anishinaabe was, and the tribe was taken west. Well, I was asked to follow these people because essentially the head of Anishinaabe was taken by a captain who happened to be coming through that area. The burial was a sitting position next to a tree. He knocked off the head, picked it up, and gave it to a collector in Plymouth. That head is now in the Smithsonian. And they said that the only way that we can retrieve that is by doing a DNA of an actual family member. Well, they didn't think we could actually find that. So in following them, I have a treaty. In that treaty, it's a very unusual treaty. Different from any other that I've seen in the Great Lakes. It was actually dealing with that family only, Anishinaabe's family. In that treaty, every one of his relatives signed, including women. This was very rare to find women signing treaties, but their names are on there. Every one of his daughters, every one of his wives are on that treaty. So I am following this trail where they had actually gone, and my daughter actually lives in Iowa, near a river called Anishinaabe. Now you think I would figure that one out, right? Which means Potawatomi. They were actually given a reserve there. They weren't taken to Kansas. They weren't taken to Oklahoma. For 10 years, they were taken to Iowa because the government ran out of funds to move them any further. So they gave them a strip of land in Iowa, named 2 of the rivers there, Anishinaabe, so they would not be forgotten, the Potawatomi rivers. Then after 10 years, then they were taken to the reserves, and now they're known as the Prairie Potawatomi in Oklahoma, and there I have traced them and found the family members so the head can be returned and be reburied. Here you'll find the types of artifacts they used. They used a puckered moccasin, one piece of leather. And the reason they call it puckered because here they pull a string at the very end and pull it into a puckered position. Then they would take and put some type of cloth in here. Yes, they were making cloth for 2,000 years. To keep their feet warm in the wintertime, they would actually braid corn husk to look like a moccasin. Then they would put cattail, the brown furry thing on the top, put that in there to keep it warm as an insulation, put in the corn husk shoe, and then put their feet into it. No Native American went any place without at least 3 or 4 pairs of moccasins with them, so that they could easily change so their feet would not freeze. It was very important. Any other questions? I'm going to take and roll this up and say thank you for coming. You can look at anything you'd like here. I also brought some hope home, which is a fry bread. You're more welcome to have some of that. Thank you again, John, for allowing me to come here.